This video will be about my grandmother and how life was like in China during the Japanese occupation, followed by the Cultural Revolution for her. My grandmother's name is Chen Yinghua and she was born in the year 1935 in the city of Wuxi, China. She was the eldest daughter in her family out of 4 siblings, which included 2 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. She had a proper schooling until she was forced to graduate at the equivalent of year 9 due to her family's financial difficulties. All of her siblings had to graduate early except for her first younger brother, who later became a university professor. Instead of going to school, they helped with house chores and farm work. In particular, they worked with silkworms to produce silk. Her father was a small salesperson who owned a snack cart, therefore his income was minimal. The family was frugal throughout her childhood and much of their food came from the harvest. When she was around 2 years old, the family had to migrate from metropolitan Wuxi to the countryside and had to live in a mountain valley for a few months to avoid the Japanese invasion in 1937. This included the siege of Shanghai and the rape of Nanking, in which 100,000 civilians were slaughtered by the Japanese troops. My grandmother and her family was lucky enough to survive without being harmed by hiding in the mountains. My grandmother remembers that during the occupation, not all of the Japanese soldiers were aggressive. Rather, some were friendly. She remembers a particular moment when she was on her way to school and passed a Japanese military office where a soldier asked her to stop. She was terribly frightened, but he just wanted to give her a lolly. In 1949, the Communist Party gained power over China. The values and political goals of the country were transformed to become a highly urbanized and industrialized nation. As a consequence, education was used to build a new generation of skilled workers. It was also used to overthrow traditional values with a Soviet-influenced communist ideology. Due to these changes, my grandmother's education was greatly affected as the education she received reflected communist ideals. During the Cultural Revolution in 1966 to 1976, the Little Red Book of Mao's quotations were produced, and it became mandatory to carry one. My grandmother, her peers, and many teachers had to thoroughly study the Little Red Book at school and work to align their values with Mao's vision for the country. My grandmother's first job was in a mechanical engineering company. She got this job through the government after passing an exam, and as her academic marks met the requirements, she was given a range of options to work at different cities. She considers herself lucky to be given the opportunity to work in Beijing for 3 years. Many of her peers were not as lucky and were allocated to work in small villages that were going through poverty. One significant event that she remembers from this time in 1954 was when she was on a business trip, where a heavy flood occurred in which many people died in. This was the Yangtze River floods, which were a series of catastrophic floods that occurred in the Hubei province. It was a major flooding event that occurred in China that was caused by poor governmental management. Around 300,000 people were lost in the floods. My grandmother was lucky to have survived this event, as she recalls managing to board a small boat that held around 10 people. It was a traumatic event for her, as she and others on the boat could do nothing to help others, as well as witnessing many deaths. She continued to work for the company for another 7 to 8 years. Overall, the Cultural Revolution crippled the economy, killed millions, and set back China into 10 years of hunger. During that time of my grandmother's life, she experienced famine. Most did not have enough to eat, to the point they had to resort to rationing to survive in winter. They could only eat a proper meal of rice once a month. Near the end of the Cultural Revolution, my grandmother quit her job and moved back to Guangzhou, where my dad and uncle were born. They grew up and spent all of their childhood and schooling years there. My grandmother now lives in Sydney with us as a family of 5. She is very much still influenced by the traditions and cultural values she received from her experiences in China. I am glad that I have the opportunity to learn about her past experiences and gain insight into how these have shaped her as the individual she is today.